Second white coat. Subscribe and like. Let's learn medicine together.
You know, when you think about an injury, you probably picture a scar, right? A cut on your skin, heals, leaves a little mark. But what happens when the injury is deep inside your brain? Well, the answer is way stranger than you might think. It leaves behind a kind of ghostly scar, a literal hole. Okay, so take a look at this. What you're seeing here is a pretty powerful image. It's a cross-section of a brain from a 69-year-old woman who had a major stroke years before she passed away. And the evidence of that stroke isn't just a memory. No, it's a permanent feature, literally carved into her brain tissue. And this is the central mystery we're going to solve today. I mean, most injuries leave behind solid scar tissue, kind of like a patch job. But right here, in this brain, there's a cavity, an empty space where brain tissue used to be. So why? To figure this out, we're going to have to put on our detective hats. And every good detective story starts right at the scene of the crime. For us, that means we've got to go all the way back to the exact moment the stroke happened, that instant when the blood supply to part of the brain just stopped. So, in what's called an ischemic stroke, a clot suddenly blocks a blood vessel. Instantly, all the brain cells that depend on that vessel are starved of oxygen and nutrients. Without their energy, this stuff called ATP, the cell's essential machinery just fails. It is a catastrophic, irreversible chain reaction that leads to a massive die-off of cells. Okay, so now you've got all this dead tissue, and cleanup is absolutely required. But the brain doesn't just, sweep things under the rug. It has a very different and, frankly, a much more dramatic way of cleaning up a mess like this. It actually performs a liquidation. The official term for this is liquefactive necrosis. And yeah, it is exactly as wild as it sounds. The brain's own immune cells release these super powerful enzymes that literally digest the dead brain tissue, turning what was once solid into a thick, goopy liquid. So let's just walk through it step by step. First, the stroke kills the neurons. Then, the brain's specialized immune cells, they're called microglia, they rush in and just unleash their digestive enzymes. Those enzymes liquefy all the dead tissue. And finally, another set of cleanup cells called macrophage shows up to clear away all that liquid debris, leaving, well, nothing behind. So you can see how this leads to a completely different kind of scar, right? This whole process is fundamentally different from how the rest of your body heals. And it is the exact reason you get a hole in the brain instead of that typical fibrous scar you'd get on your skin. This comparison really makes it clear. Anywhere else in your body, little cells called fibroblasts would show up and lay down a tough, collagen-based scar to patch up the damage. But here's the thing. The brain has very, very few of those cells. So instead, it has to rely on a different cell, the astrocyte, and this totally unique process of liquefaction, which, you guessed it, results in that empty cavity. So you might be wondering, does the brain form any kind of scar at all? And the answer is yes, but it's a different beast entirely. It's called a glial scar. Instead of laying down collagen, those astrocytes we mentioned multiply and form a cellular wall right around the edge of the cavity. It's less of a patch and more like a quarantine zone, just walling off the site of the injury. And with that final clue, we have everything we need. We can go back to that original image and see it not just as some medical curiosity, but as the completely solved crime scene of an old injury. Looking at it now, we can see it all. That huge empty space, that's the cystic cavity. It's literally the ghost of the tissue that was liquefied and then removed. And surrounding it, even though it's a bit harder to see, is that glial scar formed by the astrocytes, walling it all off. But hang on a second, there's one last little piece to this puzzle. Look at that big black space in the center. That's called a ventricle. Why is it so much larger on the side where the injury happened? It looks like it's expanded or something. Well, this is a really cool phenomenon called hydrocephalus ex vacuo. Basically, the brain has lost a huge amount of its volume, and something has to fill that empty space. So, the nearby ventricle, which is already filled with cerebrospinal fluid, simply expands to fill the void. It's an incredible illustration of just how much tissue was permanently lost. So, this whole incredible story really boils down to this one simple but powerful sequence of events. An old stroke triggers liquefactive necrosis. Macrophages come in and clean up the liquid mess, and what's left behind is an empty cystic cavity that's bordered by a glial scar. That's the whole shebang. So,
We've solved the mystery of the brain's ghostly scars. We now know exactly why a stroke leaves a hole. But this understanding, it just opens up an even bigger question for the future, doesn't it? Now that we know how the brain fails to heal itself, can we one day, maybe, find a way to help it truly repair the damage?